Broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining. We are going to give an extra minute or two as more attendees roll in, and we will get started. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. You've logged on to the Regulatory Compliance Associates webinar with Nelson Labs, Understanding PDA ANSI Standard 06-2025, a roadmap for quality culture. Now, if you missed one of our webinars or simply would like to refer to one, you can always find them on the RCA website on the on-demand webinars page listed under resources. You can also receive notifications of upcoming live webinars and on-demand webinars by signing up for the RCA newsletter or following us on LinkedIn. Regulatory Compliance Associates helps pharmaceutical companies navigate complex regulatory, quality, and compliance challenges from product development to FDA inspections. Our expert consultants deliver strategic guidance and hands-on support to accelerate market entry and ensure compliance every step of the way. Nelson Labs is a leading global provider of laboratory testing and expert advisory services for medtech and pharmaceutical companies. The company performs over 900 rigorous microbiological and analytical laboratory tests across the medical device, pharmaceutical, and protective barrier industries. The experts at Nelson know every test matters and requires solutions to complex problems to improve patient outcomes and minimize client risk. Now, let's get started. Today, we're joined by Susan Schneep and Matt Cushing, and I will let them introduce themselves momentarily. And get right into the presentation. We do encourage your questions, so please submit them at any time in the question box, and at the end, we will try to answer as many as we can in the last 10 to 15 minutes. Now, to begin today's presentation, I turn it over to Sue and Matt.
Thank you, Brandon. Are we getting an echo? Did you guys? Okay. Thanks, Brandon. So I'm Sue Schneep. I've been in the industry a long time. I'm old and crabby. And so you're going to hear why I got started on this quality culture journey. Most of the work on quality culture has been through the Parenteral Drug Association, and I'm currently on their board of directors as the immediate past chair. And I work closely with PDA because they become involved in these kinds of new activities that come out, and they keep them alive and at the forefront of industry. So go ahead and look through that. Right now, my title is Distinguished Fellow at RCA, which means I just sit around and boss people around. No, I deep background because I've been in the industry 45 years. I've seen and done a lot, and so I can offer advice and solutions to people. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Matt, who helped me write the last pharmaceutical technology article on quality culture in this ANSI standard. I may have had a hand in writing it, but Matt had to read it. So Matt, it's all yours.
It's a pleasure, Sue. I'm Matt Cushing, and I'm the Vice President of Quality and Science at Nelson Labs. I've been there over 17 years now. Love the work that we do for our clients and for patients. That's what gets me excited about this topic, especially because my role at Nelson Labs is to uphold the standards of quality, service, and science, and you can't really uphold standards without a good culture. If your culture slips, you lose it all, right? So I've been in the industry. I've taught classes at college about FDA regulations and introduction to quality systems. Really passionate about doing things right the first time, and when errors happen, handling transparently and correctly. So I'm excited about the topic we have today, and I'm excited to be here with Susan.
Thanks. So I'm going to do the overview. We've set it up a little differently, and we'll get into some of the details, but I want to give you a little history about this because it's not like we just decided yesterday we were going to talk about quality culture. What a great thing to do. This actually started way back in 2014. If people are old enough, I don't know, maybe they're not, to remember the proposal by the Food and Drug Administration on quality metrics. But that proposal, they were having at the time a problem with drug shortages. And they were attributing the drug shortages to the aging facilities and some of the systems and processes that they've been having trouble with. You can see them in the warning letters, such as incomplete investigations, data integrity issues. So what they asked industry to do was provide some metrics before they came and inspected the facility. And those metrics would be like, what is your abort rate? What's your CAPA closure rate? What's the outcome of your investigations? And you would send all of this information into the agency, and they would review it, and then they'd come out and try to help you solve it. It wasn't, I don't want to say it was surveillance. It was trying to head off drug shortages before they occurred by looking at the data behind it. So, but as with most proposals, the industry didn't take kindly to it. It was, there were a lot of objections to it and a lot of discussion about whether they were the right metrics that the FDA was calling for. So PDA at this point got in the game and called a conference, and we held a 2-day conference with the attendance of the FDA staff. And we held it on the metrics and talked about, the veracity of the program, what the program was going to do, whether the metrics were right. But one of the things that we brought up from the PDA perspective was this concept of culture. And the position was, we can send you all the data that you want, but if the culture behind it isn't robust and honest and avoiding data integrity issues, it will be meaningless. So you won't achieve anything. Now, the FDA wasn't necessarily convinced, but the more we talked about it, the more they got on board with the culture idea, the concept that you have to have a culture behind the data in order for it to be useful. And then we, as the PDA, had a group of people that we developed like an assessment tool. So how do you assess a culture? And there's training, we offer training on it and all that stuff. But it started when we first offered it, because so if you take it from 2014 to, it's 10 years, right? So 10 years, training gets old. People have been there, not new faces aren't coming. So we decided, what do you do to keep from losing all that valuable information and intellectual knowledge that you put into developing these things? And PDA is, for people who don't know it, we are an ANSI Standards development organization. So we have been audited by ANSI, and they have approved that we can develop standards that can be used for, they sometimes go into international standards too, like ISO. But for now, we just work with ANSI, American National Standards Institute. So we thought that we could come up with a standard for quality culture based on our assessment tool. One of the interesting things about ANSI, when you do develop the standard, you have to have on your committee representation from across the industry, and it has to be people outside of, like, it couldn't be all PDA members who were writing it, and it has to go out for public review and comment across the industry, or actually for anybody interested in commenting on it. So it took about 3 years to actually put the standard together, and it was released in February of 2025. And it's not your typical standard. It's not going to tell you and Matt will get into this more, but it's not going to say step 1, hire Matt Cushing. Step 2, let Matt hire all of his people. Step 3, have Sue guide Matt on. It's not that type of a standard. This is those of you familiar with the United States Pharmac Appeal, this would be like an informational chapter. Okay, so it tells you some of the theory and philosophy behind what we're describing. That's really what this standard is. So we had put together our minds and we came up with some takeaways that we're going to recap at the end, but we want you to kind of understand the principles and structures of the PDA standard, the PDA ANSI standard, and explore the key enablers and the leadership behaviors that fosters this quality culture, and then learn to identify when your quality culture starts to degrade. And I have this, well, I'll say this, and we're going to go through some real life quality culture challenges and how hopefully this can help you understand the culture that you're at. And then you'll have some tools and frameworks. But I have this theory, and I've never been able to get the data to test it, but pharmaceutical companies or companies in general, they have a period where they have difficulty with regulations. They get a warning letter, they get a consent decree. And so what they do is they hire a bunch of consultants like me, and we come out and we fix their systems and we get them up and operating. And that takes about 2 to 3 years. Then there's about 2 to 3 years where they don't have any problems. Everything goes fine. There are no 483s. Life is good. We're in control. We're in compliance. And then somebody says, why do we have all these quality people here? What are they doing? We've got this system, that system. So we lay off some quality people. But it takes 2 to 3 years for the impact of that layoff to be reflected in the degradation of those systems that were set up to prevent compliance, and you start the whole cycle over. So it's like this predictable 10-year cycle that companies go through: trouble, fix, maintain, degrade, trouble. And I think that's partly what some of the ANSI standard is trying to help prevent that cycle. We're trying to break that cycle that companies seem to be in. Next slide. And this is where I turn it over to Matt, because even though I may have written some of the standard, he read it all. So Matt.
Yeah, 60 pages almost. It's a good read. So I just wanted, the next 3 slides are just me kind of trying to summarize the standard and how you can use it and what it's good for. And then we'll get into some actual real life scenarios, which I think is the meat of everything, like what we really want to talk about. But what is culture? A lot of you are probably aware what culture is, but I thought it was interesting that the standard breaks it down into 2 pieces. And the second piece here, the structural managerial piece, is basically a lot of what we focus on. We focus on processes and quality management system and procedures and business cycles and all those things, and communication cadence and all that stuff, things that actually they do help with culture. But I think sometimes we forget about the first one, which is kind of what Susan was talking about. You can have all the metrics, you can have all the stuff, but if you don't have the shared values and beliefs behind that, if everybody's not on board and going the same direction, then you'll have challenges. So I think that that's a big piece that the standard calls out, and it puts a lot of that on leadership too. But we'll talk about the key enablers. But the shared values, beliefs, expectations, and commitment towards quality. And I didn't know how important this was until I had an experience with a merger and acquisition that we bought, and they didn't have the same culture. We put in all our good systems, we put in all our stuff, we integrated, but the culture didn't change, and we struggled with it for a long time. And until we tried to do different things with the culture, we just couldn't move the needle on it. So it does matter, and I think you all know that. I put some reasons why, but if you I think the term culture eats strategy for breakfast, a lot of us have heard that before, is true. Like, you can have the wonderful strategy, wonderful systems, but if your people don't care and have a bad attitude, you're in trouble, right? So I think culture, and that's the huge spectrum. There's in-betweens, but you want your people engaged, you want them competent, you want them desiring to be compliant, and they do that if with a shared vision, right? And if we go to the next slide, really touches on the purpose of this standard, really is identify those key topics. That's the next slide. We'll talk about those. And establishing, measuring, and maintaining a good quality culture, because it's so vital to everything that we do. And I listed out, the standard goes over a lot of these models, tools, documents, assessment tools, and those are all listed below. But the great part about this standard is it summarizes all those, puts it all in one document, so you can know, hey, which ones do I want to use? Do I want to use a combination? Do I want to choose the Shingo model to really work through which one works for my business and my culture? And then how do you actually develop and look at cultures? And should you be assessing culture periodically? Us at Nelson Labs now, we do a culture assessment in each facility, and we actually go in and we have a questionnaire and we ask particular questions, and that gives us ideas on what to do next and how to make the culture really excel or go to the next level. So we'll go to the next slide. And this is really how the standards organize into these 5 topics. So a big one that is probably the majority, I think it's 11 pages of the almost 60 pages on leadership. And really I kind of put the key takeaway that I took from each section. And I got out of this that really we need to inspire others to adopt the values. So those values of integrity, excellence, customer focus, et cetera, patient safety, that are required to achieve the mission. Because if they're on board and they're going the same direction, it's a lot easier for them to follow and do the things that the leader wants them to do. Plus, if they know the direction we're going, they can make decisions and be empowered themselves, right? And the next step was communication collaboration. That was the next key enabler. We talk a lot about top down, bottom up, but I think a key one for me is inside out. So you need to communicate, collaborate with your customers, because how do you know what good quality means if you don't know what your customers think, right? What's good quality to your customer if you're not talking to them, engaging with them, partnering with them? How do you know what aspects of quality are important to them? There's a compliance aspect, but there's also just a good quality aspect and being a good partner. If your employees and your team works for your customer, that's the best scenario, right? They think about your customer and what they need, and they think about it every day on how they can satisfy your customers. And that leads to employee ownership and engagement, big topic in the standard also. And I remember Dr. Nelson at Nelson Labs saying, we can never say that's not my job. And then some of these quotes here, all from Dr. Nelson that I learned from Nelson, but being solution focused and empowered and valued, and thinking about how can we improve things for the patient? How can we improve things for our customer constantly? If we have employees that think that way and are engaged, we can have continuous improvement. We can have suggestions. We can improve not only quality, we can improve productivity and efficiency, cost, if you have engaged employees. And the next one obviously is continuous improvement. And this is a hard one because there's a lot of change for change's sake, and there's a lot of we can't change, and that's how we've always done it. So there's the two extremes. But if you're focused on innovation and making things better for your customers and your patients, you'll have the continuous improvement mindset. And getting that across to everybody in the organization is so important, because those people on the front lines making the product need to be thinking, need to have ideas, need to have, hey, there's better ways to do it, because they're actually in the work, in the Gemba. And then technical excellence, this was kind of presented a new concept of a thing that we're all familiar with. And I just put it down as knowing the whys. If your people know the whys and know what's happening and what's really good, they're more agile. If an issue comes up, and we'll talk about this in the scenarios, if you know what you're doing and why you're doing it, it's a lot easier to respond to that issue and think of a solution. If you don't know why, or if you're just always going to do it the same way, and then you're kind of paralyzed when something weird happens, right? Because you have no idea why you're doing what you're doing. And if something weird happens, just like, I don't know what that does, how that impacts it, what the risk is, etc. So those are the 5 identified key enablers. And I thought it was really great that it was organized. And there's 5 to 6 pages or more on each of these, on how you can assess it, how you can look at it from those different standards, how you can evaluate it in your own company or team or community, etc., to see how your culture is doing. So really good stuff. I'd recommend you to read it. It's not an easy read, but it's really, really great, and it's got a lot of good information.
Some of these top, before we get into the training records and our scenarios, there was some science behind how these topics were developed. And when we first sat down and tried to figure out how do you measure quality culture, because it's not, you can see when people are unhappy, you know, intuitively there's something going on in the organization, but it's not like measurable in the fact that you're keeping, you know, what's our deviation rate. So how do you actually get to the point where you can tell that someone has trouble with their quality culture? These 5 things in discussion were the ones that were considered critical. This was the PDA discussion in developing our assessment tool. But we went ahead and did a social science. We put a survey out to our members and asked them to respond back. And we took their answers and we gave it to St. Gallen's, and they ran a social program on it, you know, to turn. What happened with the results was that it was determined that behaviors can be equated to maturity of your system attributes. So how you behave is directly dependent on how mature your quality management system is. What does your change control look like? How developed is your CAPA system? And the correlation was very, very close. And that's where the PDA tool actually assesses the maturity of your quality management system. And the more mature your system is, the better the behaviors or the happier people are. So it's kind of that's where the social science piece comes in. It's not a direct measurement, but the more mature your system is, the better your behaviors, the more people can see that you have a good quality culture because you're paying attention to those things. What also was of interest too was the culture changes. You know, I like how you speak to top down, bottom up, and inside out. And when there's movement in an organization, which we all hope there is, people get promoted, people find, you know, really good jobs. But when that happens, the culture changes because the new person coming in or the person going out, or I think even dealing, you know, Matt, you'd probably relate to dealing with your clients when you have a contact at the organization that you've been working with closely and they leave to go on to something else, and now you're working with the new person. The culture, the relationship changes. And how do you sustain? A lot of the standard when we were writing it is, how do you sustain the relationship and the culture through those changes? And so that's kind of the you know, a little bit more of the history of how this came about. What we learned quickly when we sat down was that everybody has a lot of different ways to do it, as Matt displayed with those models. And there was no one right way. It actually is kind of, you have to choose what you're going to focus on based on your culture. So it's kind of, you know, it's kind of a weird, what does your, a lot of the things, what I mean when I say based on culture, what is your tolerance for risk? What is your organization's tolerance for risk, right? What is your organization's tolerance for trying new things and failure? You know, if you try a new process, a new procedure, what's their tolerance for failure? So you're looking at all of those things. That all goes to make your quality culture. And some of the models are better at others depending on your base quality culture. Okay? Does that make sense?
Yes, and I also think culture's never static. It's dynamic. It's always changing. You're hiring new people. You're changing jobs. You're actually have new goals and priorities as a business. You new leaders, right? A leader can impact culture greatly. We've seen all this, and you have subcultures, right? You have teams within your company that have their own culture, and then you have instances you could have really positive culture champions, right? And you can also have detractors. You can have those people that kind of poison the well, and if you don't weed those people out and consistently, hold them accountable and make moves to get that, and then you can have a whole group change their culture in a short period of time. So it's something you always got to maintain and look out for, because it can shift quickly. And the Great Resignation was a good example of when I saw cultures change. Is when you have to hire a whole 50% of your staff is new, right? Your culture shifts because you brought in new people, and you've had to train them, and it's all dependent on how your trainer, did they train them right? Did they see the culture around them? Do they see leaders and colleagues doing certain things? Because they'll emulate that and do the same thing, right?
Right. And I think you brought up a very good point with the lab that you purchased. They had their own culture too. So it's when you have a corporate structure and you have multiple sites or multiple divisions, like RCA has a culture, Nelson Labs has a culture, right? And they're going to be different from site to site, facility to facility, slightly different twists. What management or leadership at the top really needs to do is lay down the bones of the culture. And then each site is going to kind of modify to fit they're going to customize it, hopefully in the right way. And let's just be clear, I just got to put this in here. When we talk about quality culture, we're talking about the culture of the whole organization, including, marketing, sales, administrative staff, financial. It's everybody. It's not the culture of the quality department, right? It's quality has a role to play in it because we manage those systems that directly reflect the culture, some of the systems, but it's everybody's role. It's the whole entire organization. So with that, let's go ahead. Sorry.
That's what I loved about the document, is it makes you think about how you can assess culture. So when you do an M&A, when you acquire a company, you can go in and look at it before you buy it and figure out what the culture is. And do you want to touch that culture? Does that align with your culture? Or you can make a plan on how to shift the culture, but you should have a plan up front that, hey, we want to come in with these things. And just so you know, culture is not easy to change, right? It's kind of ingrained in the people. And like I said, the only way to change it fast is to turn over a bunch of people, right? And get new energy and infused, or get people aligned on a great, inspiring mission or vision, right? I think that's a piece of it too. If they're aligned on a mission, people can rally and people can form up together. But you got to be aware that is a huge factor. That's like an elephant in the room, right? You can't move without effort, and you got to put the effort in. And I think sometimes we just let the culture establish itself versus being strategic about it and influencing the culture in the way we want it to go. Right.
And sometimes when you change it, people think it's like, oh, this is the 31 flavors of Baskin Robbins. What are they going to do, with our culture change today? Hopefully the next series, we're going to go through some scenarios. I want to emphasize that the scenarios are real. They actually happened either to Matt or myself. And we've set it up. When you read these and we go through them, I don't want you to think about the answer to the scenario, whether it's right, wrong, or compliant, or would meet the regulators' needs. Would the regulators accept the answer? What I want you to think about, because all the answers are viable and were given at one point for the scenario being described. What I want you to think about is what each answer, what Matt and I want you to think about is what each answer reflects your quality, is reflective in your quality culture. In other words, you pick an answer and then you go, okay, what attributes of the culture are being reflected in this answer? So the first one is about training records and data integrity. We're all familiar with that. This is a choose your adventure. You can be a CMO, you can be a contract test lab, you can be a pharmaceutical manufacturer, you could be being inspected by anyone, right? But here's what we want you to think about. And then we want to know, we're going to give you some answers and we're going to walk through them and talk about how they reflect what is reflected in that company's culture. So the inspectors are reviewing your sterility testing procedure and asked to see the training records of an employee who has routinely performed the final product sterility test. You collect the record from the document control center and review it before taking it to the inspectors. You discover that the training record for the sterility test for this employee is not in their training record. You ask the employee if they have the record and they say it's in their training folder with the document coordinator. So you go back and ask the document coordinator to look through some other analyst's training records in case it got misfiled. The document control coordinator indicates they did not find the missing training record. So now 1 hour's passed since you received this request. What do you do? Okay, that's the scenario. So let's go pop up the answers and kind of go through them. Again, whether they're right or wrong is immaterial. It's what is being reflective in their culture. Okay, so you go to your office and compose a memo. The memo vouches that the employee was trained, but the document demonstrating the training was lost. You sign and date the memo. You have the employee sign and date the memo, and you ask your boss to sign and date the memo. You then take the memo to the auditors as proof of training. So let's talk about this one. What does this say? What does this say to you, Matt?
Well, when I first think about it, like, did you verify that the employee was trained? I don't really see that. You're just vouching that the employee was trained, but did you actually look at the evidence, or just make an assumption that they had to be trained because they were in the group? Like, is there something you did to confirm that they had training before you wrote this memo? Because you're making a statement, but
Yep.
are you sure about that statement? Is kind of what
Yeah, their culture isn't quite mature yet. They don't have the ability to track the documents through the system. They have gaps in their process flow. I think of it as, like they have areas where there's the ability to have a data integrity issue, and that's what's happening here. Not that the training wasn't done, but that the paper somehow got lost in the file. And there are still, believe it or not, there are still paper systems out there. Now, it's a little easier when you have the electronic training system, but some of our clients are 503B compounders, and they're still working, they're smaller outfits and organizations, and they're still working with paper records. So this is a possible scenario. But it also speaks to there's somewhat of an honesty going on here, right? They're trying to be honest. They're trying to figure a way to justify that this person, what's at stake here is if you have someone who you cannot prove passed the sterility test, is all of the product that they were involved in releasing is now subject to recall, basically. So that's a lot on these people's mind here. So they're trying to be honest, but they're trying to figure a way around it that, maybe the regulators will support. So I don't know. It's not as strong a culture as one would like, right?
Yeah, and I also I kind of read ahead the next one, but they also are treating it as this isolated event. But do they know it's isolated, right? They're all saying, no, let's just say that it was there, or hey, it's only logical that they were trained, but we're not great at record keeping. So, it's logical, but did it really happen? Yeah.
Yeah, that's the second one, right? Yeah. So they're not even trying to, they're just saying, so the second one, you go back to the audit room, you tell the inspectors you can't find the training record. You show them other training records and you say it's only logical they were trained. So that's not really proving it, right? And you're still not really answering the question. You're kind of, it's not a very robust approach to this. It doesn't speak highly of the quality culture. If we go to the last one, or the third one, so this is the one you go back to the audit room and you say you can't find the training record for the sterility test. You provide the rest of the training record to the auditors. You tell them you've opened an investigation into the issue to see why the training wasn't properly documented and what impact it may have on the product that was released by this employee. You indicate that you're going to look at the entire training program to see if this has ever happened and to determine how you can prevent it from happening in the future. That is a very confident, robust quality culture, right? We admit it, we made a mistake, we're going to document it, we're going to find the root cause, and we're never going to let this happen again, kind of thing, right?
Right. Right. I think it's comprehensive, and it shows you're not just trying to get past the inspection, right? You want to make your system better, and you don't want to have this error or this issue, and you want to verify actually did they have the training, because it's important to you, not just because it's important to the auditor, right? I think that's key.
There's a maturity about that response that leads you to believe they're in control. You want to take the last one?
Yeah, it is late in the day and the auditors should be leaving soon, so you stall. After the auditors leave, you ask everyone to do a comprehensive search for the training record. The record's not located, so you decide to reproduce the training from memory and present it to the inspectors in the morning.
Anything wrong with that?
Well, yeah. At least the first three, you admitted the truth on the first three. This one's kind of interesting. Obviously, it could lead to integrity issues. If
Yes.
you're not honest that you did reproduce it and you date it correctly and you're honest about it, but I do see you're stalling for one, so you're kind of trying to see if they forget about it maybe, or if they won't bring it up again. Which
No confidence in their culture. Actually, the real scenario, this was the answer. It was my first day on the job as vice president of quality for an organization. And I had to sit in the conference room where the audit was going on when the director who was reporting to me of quality did this. And so, the first day I'm firing the director of quality, and they lost business. It was the contract manufacturing lab that lost a couple of clients because it was a client audit, and the client picked up that there was issues going on of very high concern, data integrity issues. If you can't trust the training record and them to be honest about that, what product release data, right? Okay, so we can see how the answers reflect some of what's going on in people's quality culture. Okay, let's go to the next scenario. This one's kind of fun. It's failed equipment qualification. And the scenario is that you have a depyrogenation oven that is recording a temperature that's higher than what it's actually baking at, right, for your glassware. And again, it's that CMO, whatever, this is it. So it's been 2 years that you have an investigation ongoing with it. You're trying to qualify the oven. This has been going on to 2 years. The FDA picks up, it was the FDA. Ooh, I gave that away. So they're not happy with the investigation. It's not complete. You've been releasing this product. It hasn't been baking or depyrogenating at the optimal temperature. And so the inspector says directly, why do you feel the product was safe to be released, and why shouldn't we consider this a public health issue? code speak for why are you not recalling your product, right? So you leave the room to go collect your thoughts, and you return later to the room and you tell them that you have an answer to the question. So what do you tell him? Let's jump to those. Okay, so now this is kind of, you indicate that even though the chart recorder was off, the oven was hot enough and the cycles were long enough to kill the pyrogen, so the product's safe. The temperature recorder has been fixed and there should be no issues. And then you pass them a book explaining the principles of depyrogenation. That's kind of an in-your-face, arrogant culture going on, right? When you're passing the manual to the inspector and saying, read up on your pyrogenation, you'll find no problem.
So I've seen
yeah.
this happen before though, and it's a lot of like, yeah, the person knows a lot, and but their argument is just, hey, it's fine, versus bullet out your, I see your next, might have these, but bullet out why you think, justify it, and give me the other reasons, make me feel what mitigates this, what makes me feel better about it because you do these other things.
Right.
Hey, it's fine. I've seen people do
trust.
That. They're the expert. Just trust me. Yeah. And then it's hard to, because sometimes I tend to trust people, but you got to dig in and say, well, no, really explain why, and give me, like you were talking to FDA or whoever, like show me the evidence, because I need evidence to make this decision. Right.
This was an actual FDA inspection. The last one, let's jump to 3. You tell them you have initiated a voluntary recall for 200 lots of product made during the time the oven was failing, the time frame the oven was failing. That's a little bit, in this case, it's a little bit overkill. It tells me they don't have confidence in their systems. And so their culture is not robust. But let's hone in on the second one and why this one's important. You tell the inspector that you've looked back over the data and you've determined there is no risk to product because of the endotoxin monitoring that is performed at the site, namely your WFI, all those points listed there, really. That is robust. That says you have a mature culture because you're able to dig out all of this information and prove that you had safe product in a short period of time. And you've looked at everything's talking to everything, right? So that tells me the communication piece is really robust at this company, because you have to go to answer this satisfactorily to the inspector. You have to go to a lot of different places and a lot of different people to get the answers. And that speaks to a really good communication effort. And in fact, this was the answer that we gave the inspector. And all he said was, make sure you put it in your response. So he accepted the data was there. The oven was a glitch. Fix the oven, because if I come back and it's doing the same thing, you're not going to get away with this data. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think what I like about this scenario is there's 2 things. One is my favorite thing. Number 2 is that's why we hire smart people and competent people, and we have good systems, right? Because we should have fail safes or parametric information, right? That gives us other information so we can make good decisions. If we're not using that, I don't think we're doing our jobs well. So we should get all the information to make a case and then make the decision. Number 3 is, you think that's the other point, is you can jump to the extreme case of let's be so conservative here, but that actually might do a lot more harm and not even make sense and add value and actually protect patients, right? If you have number 2, which is good information, you can make a good decision, but it's also costly for the business and it ruins your reputation and all sorts of things, where it was just a way too conservative, not smart answer to the question, but you're just taking the extreme approach, maybe because you're lazy and you don't know that stuff in number 2, but I think that's why we want technical excellence, like it says in the standard, that competency, that excellence, because we can make good decisions if we know the why and we know the processes, right? So I think this is a great example.
And then the next one's yours because it happened to you. So you get to walk through it.
Yeah, and this one didn't necessarily happen in inspection, but you can find these things in an inspection for sure. And we're going to talk about just a calculation issue that was detected at a firm. You want to go to the next slide there, Brandon? So you discover an issue with a validation calculation in a test method to detect residuals on products. Could be your product, could be customer products, right? But the calculation was based on a false assumption of the positive control contained half of the known amount of this residual, right? So you're actually underestimating everything for years, right? And if you discover issues with the validation years ago, it's usually a big question. What do you do, right? And you get people in a room and you have to decide, like, what's the best course, what's the best scenario, what do we do? And if we go to the next slide, very simple, very, plausible issue where we found an issue that happened years ago and now we have to address it. So number one, you found this internally, so you document the issue in your internal audit documentation and you correct the issue with your calculation going forward. But you determine there's no need to notify your customers and there's nothing that can be done about the past results because they probably already released product. They've probably already put it in the market, et cetera, right? So why ruin your reputation and go out there and tell them you did something wrong? What do you think about that one, Sue?
I like the part about documenting it in your internal audit. I don't like the part about not notifying. I don't think that's the we talked about the communication full scale, top down, bottom up, and inside out, I think was what your terms. This, when you have this kind of issue, you're going to be audited eventually. Somebody's going to come and want to audit that, and they're going to find this. If it's a client maybe, and it's just going to look like you swept it under the carpet. So I don't think it's a robust quality culture, nor technical excellence. It's great you found it, but how you're documenting it, no.
Yeah, my thought on it, you're not aligned on your mission and vision of protecting patients, right? Because you're making an assumption, but you don't always know what your customers are doing with their products.
Right.
And if they have a huge inventory that they might not have released yet, that they should know about this beforehand, or if it's in the market and they need to, what that result means to your clients, you don't always know too.
Right.
So I think it's good to, The next one is you quickly notify your clients of the discovery. You pause the testing until you can correct it. So you stop it. So kind of a line stoppage. We can't do this until we fix this. You assess impact to all the studies you performed. And you recalculate everything and reissue amended reports to all your clients. And then you also change your validation review process to make sure you can detect and prevent these from happening again. So
I like that one. I do. But the piece that I think that's the robust quality system. You're really doing everything right. Quickly notify, that's always subjective to me, right?
Yes,
and so are you too quick? The question I have there is, do you notify? We used to struggle with this in contract manufacturing, and I'm sure you do as contract test lab. When you get that OOS, do you call them up right away and say, we have an OOS and we're tracking it down? Or do you wait until you've completed the investigation? Sometimes your clients panic. So this is an actual case where I think you're knowing your client, right, is going to be critical in how you move forward.
Yeah. And I think so this was the answer that we actually did, but I can move on that. But
brilliant.
But you're right. It's what's the timing of that contact? Because do you just say, hey, there was an issue, we don't know anything about it yet? That doesn't help your clients, right?
That's like number 3, kind of.
Yeah, and you can't wait 7 years to tell them if it takes you that long to go through it, right? But you need to have enough information so that they can start, if they need to take action on their side, start taking that action, or they can at least ask questions, right? If you don't know enough to give them a summary or anything. So I think you have to do a preliminary investigation, at least to get enough information to.
Yeah.
For us at the time, we had to know what the impact of the recalculation were worst case would be, right? So at least we knew, hey, at worst, it's going to do this to your result. So at least we had that information and we could give that to them. But then, and we're going to actually go recalculate all your studies. But at worst case, it could do this to you. And then that way it gives them enough information
So I think you have a whole lot of technical excellence going on in this one. And communication skill. You have to be really good at communication skills. Since we know this is the one, that's not the right answer, the answer that you gave. How did you inform management? Because there's an element of management, right? Because sometimes when I've had some of the scenarios I've been through, and you tell management and they go, oh, I don't want you to call the client yet, so, right, there's that, all of that is, so to do this and notify your clients right away, you had pretty supportive senior level management.
And that's, you need that, right? That's part of the culture piece, to be transparent, to be open. But, it's also strategic. You should maybe check yourself with a lawyer before you send that note, just to let everybody know you had a problem, just to make sure that, legally it makes sense and all those other things. But yeah, you're going to have a little bit, and from the quality perspective, luckily I've always felt supported, but I do hear some scenarios where, hey, my boss is not letting me, quote, do the right thing. But we got to speak up and say those things and talk it through and make the right decision. So number 3 is kind of the same thing, but you notify clients as you update their data. So you're going to update the data. We had to make that decision, right? Are we going to wait until we recalculate all their information to let them know? But
yeah,
how do you do 6,000 calculations quickly, right?
Right.
So it's better to just, hey, so we figured worst case first, let them know. And then that way worst, it would do this. And that would still be in my spec, right? So I'm okay. Or the other option, you don't change anything, as you want the results to be consistent, because that is an issue, right? If you're recalculating everything, now your results are different, and there's variability in the test. So do you just justify it's twofold, it's not a big deal, right? You could make those assumptions and say they're fine, but you are making an assumption about what they use the results for if you do that, right? So
yeah, you are, and that's not good communication.
Yeah.
Okay, Brandon, what's our next slide? I think we're assessing in the scenarios what we came up with. As far as those scenarios, what were the strengths of these cultures, and the answer that some of the answers had no strength. And so you just have to realize that reflected in some of those answers are just a bad quality culture, right? And in the training records data integrity one, there was a transparency and a speak up and then a standardization, and the answer that's acceptable, right? So for failed equipment, that was technical excellence. Also, some transparency in the fact that communication, we left off communication. I'm mad at myself for that. But the communication in both scenario 2 and 3 is critical, because as Matt said, and as we know, to get all that information to wrestle these issues to a logical and acceptable conclusion, you've got to be transparent and you've got to have communication across the organization. And then for the last one, that was yours, Matt.
Yeah, really, we found this internally, our own employee, and they brought it forward. So that, transparency is great. And I honestly, to promote that culture, we try to reward people that bring things forward. Even though it's like, oh, you dropped a problem in our lab, it's still, hey, you found it. You didn't cause it, but you found it and you brought it up, and now we're going to fix it, do the right thing.
And that's important.
Yeah, and you share that with the whole org. You say, hey, this is something we discussed. They can learn from it, but they can also see, hey, the company actually appreciates being let know if there's an issue, right? And they take it and they do the right thing with it. So speaking up, being transparent with your customers, talking to them, and then technical excellence. You had to figure out what that was, and you have to justify that, right? So I think that's the fun part. Like I said, is using your experts and figuring out, justifying what you do. So
Thank you both for taking the time. We've gotten a couple questions come in, so I'd like to address them now with their final 5 minutes. If we don't get to your questions, we'll be happy to address them individually after we conclude today. And just as a reminder, we will be sending an email out after the event to have access to this webinar on demand. So to start off, can you talk about the application of these factors in a laboratory setting and how it may differ from that of a manufacturer?
Yeah, and I don't think there's a huge difference, but in a lab, like I said, our customers are really important because we're third party, right? We don't do our own testing, we do other people's testing. So the transparency, the partnership with your customers, that inside out communication is so important because you need to be aware of what they are trying to accomplish, because you're there to help them accomplish their mission and their goals, right? And also just technical excellence is huge in a lab, right? We don't put things on a conveyor belt machine and it's made at the end of the day. It's people that are touching everything, doing everything, making decisions, and we consider ourselves as a problem solver. So if we don't have that technical excellence, we won't have customers, because they come to us because we're the expert with the test, etc. Just like each of you are probably experts in your individual fields, your customers come to you because of what you can offer them, which is unique, right? So you need to be the expert and you need to make the call, but in partnership with your customers, right? They know that their product, you know the test, you got to work together to figure out a solution. So I think that's maybe the difference in a lab. We rely so much on our people and their brains. We have good quality systems, good processes, etc. But we have to have good decision makers, and we have to empower our people to do that. So I think that's a kind of a key thing a laboratory has to do. So,
and you obviously have good communication amongst your analysts, because that's key in a contract test lab, right? That they communicate, because they need to be able to pick up each other's work.
Yeah, and good instructions, right, on how to do each specific. We can get thousands of different types of products, right, that we've never seen before. So we have to figure out quickly how to test it and then pass that on to the next person that tests it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Great. Another question we got here: what factors of quality culture are the most important to the pharmaceutical industry?
All of them. Leadership and communication would be top on my list, but I really, as tongue-in-cheek as it is, all of them are important. They all work together to create that quality culture. That's why, it's kind of like watching, you have to keep a handle on each and every aspect of those: the technical excellence, the communication, collaboration, the management responsibilities, employee engagement. You have to watch them all, because when one starts to degrade, you're going to find it's going to impact others. So you really need to be watching them all. I tongue-in-cheek as it is, I would say all of them.
I think they're really heavily connected. When I read through the standard a couple of times, they referred to things in all sections, and leaders can drive it, but also if leaders, you have great leaders, but your bottom-up communication doesn't happen. Your leaders don't know what's going on, right? So there's a lot of factors, and if employees don't own and they're engaged, continuous improvement, you need to be better, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I think you can't have a good culture without one of those, right? So,
agreed.
We've got time for one more. Let's see here. Can you talk about no, that was already one that we discussed. To what extent is the customer perspective incorporated into the quality decision making?
Well, that's a great one, because that's kind of the inside out thing, right? I think at Nelson, we get almost 200 audits from our customers a year. And I think we get a lot of communication about what they expect. But it's so important because we provide a service or a test, and data, our data is the product, but they have the product, and the information they're using that we provide is on their product. So we really need to know and partner with them, be a good partner, be incorporated into their organization. Really, we are their testing lab. They can have a testing lab in-house, but we are the out-of-house testing lab, right? So we need to be just as good as that in-house lab on if there's an OOS, if there's an issue, if there's a problem, we're here to help you and solve your problems. I really think that you can't define quality, like I said, without knowing what your customers want. Because what is good quality to your customer is really what defines quality in your organization. So,
Agreed.
Great. Thank you both, Sue and Matt, for going through all of that information and giving this presentation and answering these questions. I'd also like to thank our listeners and our attendees for joining this session. I hope they found it to be valuable. And please reach out if you guys have any more questions, comments, or concerns. And like I mentioned previously, this will be available on demand on the RCA website, as well as the Nelson Labs website within the next 48 hours. Thank you again for joining us today, and we will talk soon.
great. Thanks all.